Thank you for joining today's webinar, Revealing the Power of Experience Programs in a Time of Crisis. We have a large audience logging on, so we certainly appreciated your patience as we waited to get started. With me on the line are 4 of our top experience experts who are set to provide you with suggestions and best practices on how to leverage your CX, EX, and for some on the call today, your patient experience programs during this time of crisis. As the subtitle says, we're all kind of looking for heroes right now. We see amazing acts of courage and heroism from individuals every day related to the pandemic. They wear many hats and play many roles. And in your company, your experience and voice of the customer programs have the capacity to play that role. Insight from these programs have the power to help guide current and future decision-making across the enterprise. We just need to understand how to leverage the data, and that's what our experts are talking about today. Before we get started, let's answer a couple of questions up front, and those are, is this webinar being recorded? And the answer is yes. The webcast is being recorded, and you'll receive a link to the presentation within the next 24 hours. And secondly, will there be a Q&A period? And yes, we are planning to have time for Q&A after our presenters conclude a formal presentation. If you have a question during the presentation, just type it into the question box on your screen, and we'll get to as many of those submitted questions as we can during that Q&A time. So let's take a quick look at our agenda today before we launch into introductions. Dave Ensing will start us off today with thoughts and best practices on monitoring your CX programs. Are you capturing the right information right now? Next, Dan Hickey will explain how to learn from what you're hearing. You've got the insight. How do you take the next step and put it into action? And then Jennifer Passini will let us know how to share these results with leadership. Your organization's leadership team is looking for answers more than ever. You've got insight that can help with decision-making at the highest level. Now is your time to step up. And then finally, engage your employees. We're excited to have employee experience expert Paul Warner with us, and he'll explain how to keep your organization's most important assets, your employees, feeling empowered and engaged. As many of you know, InMoment and MaritzCX joined forces at the beginning of last month, and we're certainly excited about the future, what it means to our customers and the industry. But one of the major benefits of these two organizations coming together is we've doubled our expertise. And we're pretty enthused that today's panel is comprised of experts from both InMoment and MaritzCX, an InMoment company. Let's meet our experts with just a quick introduction, and then we'll get rolling. Starting us off today will be Dr. Dave Ensing. Dave is Vice President, Research Consulting, and has over 20 years of CX program experience, mostly in the automotive, or what we now call the mobility sector. He is an expert in providing research design consultation to clients, and he facilitates continuous improvement of existing client studies. Dr. Dan Hickey. Dan is a senior research manager serving clients within the financial services industry. He oversees all aspects of research design, data analysis, and reporting. He has over 30 years of experience in the financial services. Dr. Jennifer Passini. Jennifer is Senior Director of CX Solution Strategy and is responsible for providing CX consultative support to the organizations that are looking to implement new CX programs or enhance their existing efforts. Jennifer is aligned with the financial services industry, where she has been helping clients for about 17 years. And finally, Dr. Paul Warner. Paul is an industrial, organizational, and clinical psychologist with 15 years of experience in organizational development, leadership development, behavioral analytics, customer experience, and employee experience. He is an author, having co-written the EX strategy book, Magic, the 5 Keys to Unlocking the Power of Employee Engagement. Paul's writing has also appeared in the Huffington Post, Inc., and most recently in Forbes, and several other major publications. So wow, That is certainly a lot of collective PhD firepower and years of expertise. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Ensing to start us off. Dave?
Thanks, Jen, and thanks everybody for attending. I'm going to start us off by talking about what to look for in your customer experience data. I'm also going to steal my own thunder by telling you up front the major points I want you to take away from my portion of the presentation, which are, don't worry too much about absolute scores, and we'll talk about why absolute is underlined there. Look for what has changed, and think about what might be temporary and what might be permanent. So one of the first things that you might want to look at are your CX program metrics, and that's actually one of the things that we get asked most about. So some of the things that you should look for are, especially if you're doing transactional research where you are following up on customers' interactions with your companies, look at the volumes of transactions that you have, because obviously people are staying at home, people are isolated, stores are closed or furloughed, so the number of transactions is going down. But it's in the in-person realm, that is. But then also, you might have online channels or call centers, and their volumes might be going up. So pay attention to your transaction volumes. Next, look at your response rates. And I'm going to present some top-level response rate data to you in a second, but to tell you the truth, I think it's kind of worthless data. And the reason that it's kind of worthless data is that I think response rates are really going to vary by your program, your business, your geography, and even the types of surveys that you're giving. For instance, we've seen some increase in response rates in relationship surveys or time-based surveys, and that probably has to do with the fact that people are sitting around without much to do, so they can fill out surveys. Now, the most important thing to look for, though, is the volume of actual responses that you get. And that's really an interaction between the number of transactions that you're sampling or that you're sending out and your response rate. And as those things change, your volumes will change. And we, you'll see in a second, have seen that volumes are going down. So you want to pay attention to that, especially if you're doing analyses at the store level or something like that. It probably won't affect your top level analyses, but you want to make sure you have enough sample for good data. Now, I promised a little bit look at response rates. As Jen mentioned, InMoment and MaritzCX combined at the beginning of the month, but we still have two separate platforms. So here we have MCX platform changes. And what I want you to focus on, I pulled this data yesterday, by the way. What I want you to focus on are the endpoints on the right side of this data. So look at like the bottom or the last 4 points of data, because that's basically March forward. And you can see in the top chart that at MCX, we're seeing response rates go up a little bit. And if you look at on the bottom, it's a little hard to tell. You got to kind of look at the chunks because those are daily chunks, and we always get more volume on a weekday than we do on the weekend. But you can see that our volumes are going down there. Secondly, we have the in-moment data, and the in-moment data would show something a little bit different. That shows decrease in response rates. So if you think about, this is why I said that it might be worthless data about response rates at least, because MaritzCX is showing them going up a little bit, the InMoment platform's going down a little bit. You put them together, they're about even. It really is going to vary depending on the types of studies, and our differences are probably due to the different mix of studies in our two platforms. But you do see here on the bottom that, again, volumes are down, so that's pretty consistent, and that's probably because fewer transactions to actually monitor. But also, if you look at the very end of that volume thing, it looks like maybe they're stabilizing, so that's good. Now I want to talk briefly about what changes in your actual data to look for. So the first thing to do is look at the performance of your key drivers in relationship to each other. Don't worry too much about their overall change because they're going to change. But what you want to do is see which ones change more than others, because those are the things that are probably most affected by the crisis. For instance, maybe your ease of doing business score has gone down than most scores because you have fewer people working with your clients or in your outlets. So look at scores in relationship to each other. See what's changed most. Also, don't forget about trending versus last year or history, because scores do move seasonally. We know that there's some seasonality in data. So look at, okay, how much have it changed this year as related to how much they changed last year? Because if they're within bounds, it's probably not crisis related. If they're out of bounds, it might be. Also, you can use trending to monitor your CX COVID efforts. So if you have specific efforts around ease of doing business or cleanliness or something else, then you can monitor that. And what I wanted to say about that is use as specific a measure as you can. So if you have something around cleanliness, use a cleanliness measure. Don't use an overall score, because that thing's going to be affected by a lot of different things. Also assess your key driver importance, especially as we're coming out of this, that you probably have an importance analysis that says that, hey, these items have this weight in driving overall satisfaction or overall recommend, and those things might change, and they might stay changed. So ease of doing business might be more important now. Efficiency might be more important now. Knowledge might be important now. And maybe that'll change back, maybe it won't, but you might want to look at those importances. And this one's kind of a no-duh point. Look for new and unique findings, but there's two things that I wanted to say about this. The first thing is that a lot of times researchers, including me, will look at data and think about, boy, that's odd. Why did that happen? And I'll attribute it to just kind of a fluke in the data, and oftentimes it is a fluke in the data. But in these strange times, you might get strange results, and you should pay more attention to those now and follow up on them and investigate whether it's due to this crisis. The other thing is people are looking a lot at comments, which is great because customers say whatever the heck they want in comments, even regardless of the question. So that's a great place to look for things. But don't forget your other specifies, because if you have a list of attributes about some sort of question and you have an other specify, things might be important to that question now that weren't before, and you're going to find them in the other specifies. And then finally, plan for the future. So some of the changes that you're going to see over the next few months are going to be temporary. Others are going to be permanent. Obviously, there's no way to predict 100% which is which. But as that happens and as you identify things, think about how your business model is changing and how changes in customer experience might be permanent and the new normal. So I talked about what to look for. I'm going to turn it over to Dan now to talk about where to look.
Thanks, Dave. So what I want to talk about now is the specifics that we want to focus in on and how to tie all that information together and then turn that into action. So what we want to start with are those key driver questions that Dave was talking about. And so what we want to think about here is, what questions are we expecting will tell us the most about what's changing in our business environment? And this list is not meant to be exhaustive, and it may vary by industry and business to business. But keep in mind that these are the areas that we are most likely to see changes, and also that we want to be tracking as we try to take action to address the problems that our customers are having as they have to adjust to new ways of doing business with us. So the first area is process. And at least having some questions around whether people are able to accomplish what they came in to do, whether it was easy or difficult, whether they had a problem, were they satisfied with how the problem was handled. It doesn't have to be all of these questions, but some question about, are they able to do what they want to do, and or are they having difficulties? Now, the other thing that can be changing is, particularly as more business moves to call center and away from stores and branches, is there may be new challenges for representatives, and they may show up in the ratings. We may see declines in feeling that the reps have sufficient authority to act, or how quickly they're able to respond. There may also be declines in rep knowledge, which could reflect that either the reps don't have a knowledge about that area, or they don't have access to the systems and technology that they need to answer those questions. I'm going to skip over the next one for just a moment and go to, for those areas that are still open in terms of stores, branches, or other kinds of in-person locations, certainly a few things that are likely to be prominent, as Dave mentioned, cleanliness. And this is an attribute that if it's in your tracking already, probably in the past had more to do with aesthetics. Did it look clean? And now it's going to take on a new meaning. It's probably going to be more about, does it feel sterile? Does it feel safe in terms of cleanliness? And the other thing, of course, you're likely to see are changes in hours. And again, this is to be expected, but as you make adjustments, you want to see if your scores are adjusting accordingly. For online, we may see an increased importance on security. This may also affect call center, but again, as people move away from in-person to more online, there can be increased concern over their security. And then I want to go back to that rep core attributes. These are things that we actually would hope can stay the same, but there are also areas that if there's more stress on customers and on employees, it's easy for these to slip. So we want to be monitoring things like courtesy, professionalism, empathy, and be able to coach back to our frontline staff that we understand there's a lot of challenges in these times, but we want to make sure that we're being professional as we deal with clients, even if they're very stressed and may not be as kind to us as they were in the past. So those are the key driver types of questions. Now let's talk about the unstructured feedback for a moment. Now the most typical kind of unstructured feedback is the open-end question. Most of you probably have at least one open-end question someplace in your surveys, and those can give us a lot of information. Many of you are already tracking for mention of coronavirus or COVID-19, but we can also see, we can look at the themes that we're seeing and see if some themes spike. So if we see a spike in not being able to reach people or hours or fees, that tells us something that might be changing as the business demands change, and so we can look into that. The other advantage that open-ends gives us is that, especially once we're categorizing these, we can now start reading these in context. So if we read all of the questions about, all of the comments about fees, we might start to understand that it's a certain fee that's becoming a problem in this environment, or it's being surprised by a fee. A few things that we can't learn from open ends. They are not a substitute for the key driver closed-end questions. We can't assume that just because someone doesn't mention something spontaneously that it's not important to them. So we still need to get those ratings to understand what is and isn't important and what they are experiencing. So we need to balance the two types of questions. Also, the type of open end that we ask puts guardrails around what people tend to answer. So if we're not asking about suggestions, we don't often get them, which also is a good reason why at this point you may want to ask some specific open-end question about, is there anything that they would like you to do in this current environment, so that you put all of those in the same place and you can start looking at them in a structured way. Social media and other kinds of unsolicited comments have all the same rules with one other caveat. In most cases, we don't know much about who's posting these comments, and so they may not be very representative of our customers. They may not even be customers. So we just have to put that into context, particularly when it doesn't jive with the other things we're hearing. So let's talk for a minute about pulling all of this information together. We've talked about the first two on here. Our qualitative data, our open ends, our quantitative, our key drivers. Most of you probably have some operational or financial information in the samples that you're sending to send out surveys. And if you're not already looking at that information, this is a great time to be doing that so that you can get more insights Is it a certain type of transaction that people are having problems doing? Is it a certain level of wait time that's causing dissatisfaction? How can you use that to get more information? Paul is going to go into much more detail about the employee experience, but remember that your employees can also provide input about what the new challenges are. And don't limit this just to frontline feedback. It can be important to get operations, technology, even staff groups. The one other caveat is that people are having a lot more demands placed on their time, and they're also working in new conditions. So balance the need for input from your employees with being respectful of their workload. Then just 2 notes to consider. The opportunity to act here has a shelf life. We have to be able to act quickly, so use the best available data. Down the road, you can get the best sources of data, but let's take, for example, we don't have operational data in our sample file right now, and it's going to take 2 months to be able to add it. Well, that's too late. Maybe we should just add a question to our survey that asks people, what did you come in to do, so we can use that information. The point is to take the best available data and use it to its full extent. Now then what you want to do is take all these different sources of information and look for both consistencies and inconsistencies. The consistencies tell you that you can have more confidence on acting on this information. If you're hearing it in your open ends, you're seeing it in your ratings, you're hearing it from your employees, that's going to give you a lot of confidence that this is something to act on. When you see inconsistencies, that may point out unique groups that have different needs. And so we're going to try to understand what the source of those inconsistencies are. But the point is both are giving you information. And then finally, we want to take all this information and act on it quickly. So the first thing is, if you already have a program in place to follow up on the customers who are giving you feedback in your surveys, continue to use that. If you don't, at least do alerts to your branches, your stores, a call center, follow-up unit, somebody that can follow up with these customers, make sure they're able to do business, and recover with them to the extent possible. Even something as simple as an apology can really help repair a customer relationship. The next thing is look at opportunities to proactively eliminate problems. One of the ways you can make things better is to eliminate the need to contact you. So if your hours are changing, have you alerted your customers that the hours are changing and how to find out what the most up-to-date hours are in their local store or branch? If you have policies that are getting in the way, can you loosen those policies? Can you eliminate fees ahead of time that you know are going to cause problems? Then identify new obstacles. What are challenges to people going into new channels or having increased demand on the online channels and the call center channels? How can you address these things? And again, these don't have to be perfect fixes. Workarounds are great at this point in time. And then finally, are there opportunities to reallocate resources? And it may not be a full reallocation, but if you have store staff or branch staff that either aren't going in at all or are in reduced hours, can they be leveraged to do callbacks to customers or be available for chats that can help take some of the strain off of your other channels? And with that, I am going to turn it over to Jennifer Piscini to talk about how we share all of this information with our leadership teams.
Thanks, Dan. So now, as Dan mentioned, we're going to talk about how to package things up for leadership. And I'm going to build on a lot of what Dan and Dave have already talked about and how you can take what you're learning to share timely and critical insights with your organization's leadership. There's a couple of things that I want to mention before I get started, though. First, that I hope that you all recognize the gold mine that you're sitting on in terms of giving information to your leadership to inform the decisions that they're having to make very quickly right now. And so think about all the opportunities that you have for actionability that Dan just spoke of. And as we consider our unprecedented conditions, the impact that that's having on behavior, psyches, and certainly perceptions of companies. So giving the right information to your leadership, while today they may be guessing about what they can do, you can really leverage your CX and EX programs today to help support decisions that they're making about changes, how to really understand current experiences and how that's influencing other businesses' impact as they look for appropriate actionability. So that's one thing that I just want to focus on, is that you're sitting on a gold mine. Make sure you leverage it for your leadership. The second thing is that when I define leadership, I'm using a fairly broad definition. So think about leadership in terms of business unit leaders, line of business, channel managers, and of course your executive team. So I just want you to consider that a broad definition based on your organization. So we really want to make sure that we're giving leadership two perspectives. What are customers experiencing today? And probably, as Dan mentioned, kind of focusing on how that's changed. And then also really understanding the business impact from the lens of your customers' employees and how things are evolving and changing for them. So let's talk about how we pull those two perspectives together for leadership. As I would encourage you, as Dan and Dave both mentioned, that although we certainly are collecting a lot of quantitative data and tracking scores continues to be important, I encourage you for your leadership to focus on telling a contextual story, that you're leveraging all the data sources that you have available to you to tell that story. And this is a perfect time for you to leverage multiple data sources, because you can learn a lot about what customers are experiencing from the operational metrics that you have, like transactional volumes or transaction types, what they're actually doing with you, how they're interacting with the organization, as well as the feedback that you're receiving. As we consider that point, I've encouraged many of our clients to think about and look at transaction types in terms of what customers aren't doing right now. So we want to make sure that we're delivering on the experiences that customers continue to have, but are there things that aren't happening anymore because of the crisis? And if those are things that are just not needed anymore, then you can kind of set them aside and they'll come back. But if you're thinking about things that they can't do because they don't know how, or they don't know how, or they don't know the way, or it doesn't exist, it reflects both an opportunity to develop a communication plan or to innovate. So I think about all the restaurants that have closed their in-dining opportunities. And maybe that was their sole focus, but they've decided to revisit their menus and offer family-style meals via delivery and pickup. That reflects a great way to look at the way that customers interact with them and evolve during these really critical times. I also think about the banking clients that I support in my role, and many of them have developed communication plans around informing and kind of coaching customers that have relied on branches and ATMs to leverage existing digital channels, and understanding the way that customers are not experiencing you today in ways that they should continue to be able to will help you highlight for your leadership where there may be short-term fixes, so reallocating resources, as Dan mentioned, or where opportunities exist to potentially innovate in the future so that you can meet that need. I think that thinking about this crisis in terms of the long term is really going to differentiate the customers that are just responsive, reactive right now are compared to those that are doing those things, but also thinking about ways that they can do better in the future. So in the last webinar, we advise companies to continue to listen. And we stand by that recommendation. And I've heard from many of our clients as they've kind of given us feedback on a lot of the webinars and white papers that we've shared to date. Many of them are very, very glad that they kept their programs on because they're hearing new things, different things that they've never heard before. Those things can also be things that you should highlight for your leadership because they reflect, again, opportunities to fix things, opportunities to better meet the needs of your customers, and potentially opportunities to innovate in the future. So please highlight these opportunities as well. I know we've already said that Paul's going to talk about employee experiences and perspectives later, but it's a great time for you to leverage that input if you aren't already. Your frontline, particularly in areas where stores are still open, particularly in patient experience, all of those areas, please listen to your frontline and leverage their insights on what you could do better for your customers. Many of these employees are not only having to rethink how they deliver to considering their own safety, but they're also thinking about new ways to do things to deliver and meet the expectations of your customers. So as your leadership is focused on the business impact of COVID-19, they're making changes on the fly and potentially being very reactive. We hope that you're leveraging the insights that you're receiving from your program, even if they're anecdotal, to help highlight the areas where they should focus. And one important way that I've seen our clients do this is to tell that contextual story, as I mentioned, around what they're actually experiencing from a transactional interaction standpoint, overlaying that with the feedback that you're receiving, but also keeping track of all the changes that are occurring almost on a daily basis for many of your organizations or in your particular geography. So there's as parts of the country are issuing stay and shelter orders, or companies are making changes to redeploy and allocate resources in a particular area. I know that many of our banking clients are, taking some of the branch staff and putting them in the call centers to help deal with some of the volume that are coming into those channels. So as changes are made on the fly, make sure that you're connecting all of that data to those critical points in the timeline so that you can look for change to understand what's working and of course, what's not. So what does this all look like for leadership? Here are some general recommendations. So share insights and stories. I know that it's easy for us to slip, and I'm a data person too, so I totally get it. It's easy for us to slip into just sharing scores and trends and data, but what's most important here are the insights and stories, really understanding customers' needs, the interactions that they're changing, the behavioral needs, and the behavioral changes that are occurring because of the constraints that we have should help guide your organization's actions today and in the future. Use channels that already exist to share information with your leadership, but do it more frequently. So the volatility of the situation that we're experiencing justifies more frequent reporting. Even if it's not based on a lot of data, I think that giving some exposure and visibility to those two things that I talked about earlier, what customers are experiencing and the business impact will help your leadership make more informed decisions. So I know that a lot of our clients are leveraging their reporting platforms to create very specific reporting around a crisis. Others are creating offline deliverables that are emailed out weekly or daily with leadership to share things that they're learning. And as you share information with your leadership, make sure that you're also asking about their informational needs. What does your leadership need to make better, more informed decisions? Before I turn it over to Paul, I just wanted to mention I saw a post on LinkedIn from a contact that I have, and it said something like, pay attention to how companies are treating their customers' employees right now. And that's all it said. And that really resonated with me as we think about how to best share the insights that we're learning from our programs today with leadership so they can make the very best decisions for not only customers, but their employees. So with that, Paul, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the employee experience.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, a lot has been mentioned about how we measure, how we report out results, and I want to talk about what I think is a really foundational principle, and that is making sure that our employees feel cared for and can still engage with the organization. I'm really talking about two different populations here. I'm talking about one population that has maybe not worked remote but are now at home. And we're also talking about those essential workers, those on the front lines in certain retail sectors and healthcare as well. And so I'll try to tailor my message to those two segments. But in general, why do we even focus on the employee experience? Well, we have found, and there is clear evidence that there is a link between employee experience and customer experience. We find that those teams and individuals that are that have higher levels of engagement. And I define engagement as someone who is passionate, concerned, they put their best selves into their work. If you have a higher percentage of those types of employees, it's much better for your brand, for your organization. We all know this. I'm preaching to the converted here. But we do find that our best-in-class brands across all industries have made a concerted effort on creating the right experience for employees, because they know that if the employees have the tools and resources, have the team structures and relationships that they need, they can then provide or fulfill the brand promise and be advocates. And so what we try to do is not only look at those time-based employee experience measurements, but we try to look along the life cycle of an employee. And what we're experiencing right now with the crisis is an important milestone, because what we've got two different phenomena going on. We first of all have this new reality of work. So a lot of people are, even if they're on the front lines, their hours may have changed. The process procedures may have changed. They're concerned for their health and safety. And then you have a large percentage of the population that are now working remotely. The second phenomenon that we need to consider is what happens when everyone comes back to work as it was, right? The way that we treat our employees, the messages that we send, the support that we give them, that is going to inform how they will come back, either as advocates for the organization or detractors. So I wanted to just go through a couple of factors, and a lot of these are related to remote workers, but some will apply to those in the essential roles. Remote working is the new norm. We've had to change the way that we communicate with each other, and it's some people, large segments, will feel disconnected. Those introverts that really enjoy working with their colleagues face to face may be feeling like they're missing out on something. The other reality is that we now have partners, roommates, family, children. They are now our new coworkers, including pets, right? And so we have to deal with that. Not only do we have to help our children to make sure they're doing their schoolwork, but we also have to fulfill our jobs. In addition to that, those that are in essential roles, if their children are out of school, they now have to consider what childcare looks like and things related to that. So increased anxiety around job security, which changes the way that people perceive their work. And then, of course, employee perceptions are impacted by the response of leaders. So as I mentioned, those two phenomena. The second one, where people come back, the concern that I have is that in our research, we have found that disengaged employees talk 2 times more than people that love the organization. They tend to be the loudest voices in the room, so there's much more negative contagion. And so we need to be very careful about, how we respond to them. So here's some best practices. So we need to empathize with employees related to the new reality of work, especially those on the front line in essential roles. Listen to employees' fears, concerns, and ideas. Provide them the right tools and resources, and those are changing as well, in terms of safety and social distancing and some of those things. Providing flexibility, because now people are working alongside, again, all the people at their home. And then try to continue business as usual. I think people can find a lot of security and comfort in resuming work, right? Even if it is remote, or even if the circumstances have changed, that ability to work is I think really important to manage anxiety and some of the fears that people have during the crisis. Finally, how do you approach your employee experience programs moving forward? This is really a good time to listen and engage your employees more than ever, right? We're dealing with these universal primal emotions: fear, anxiety. We feel a sense of that we've lost control of certain aspects of our lives. In fact, as you can see on that chart, 1 of 2 employees are afraid to go to work, right, because of safety concerns. And there's this tendency to say, okay, everything's paused. But this is the time where you really need to reach out, show that you care, show that you're listening to your employees. In fact, Maritz and InMoment, we are launching a program where we're going out and asking people if they feel like the company has responded in the right way, if they feel like there's, they're showing empathy, do they have the tools and resources, and then of course allowing them to share their own insights. And that's something that we're providing to our clients, free of charge, because we feel it's so important. If something like that is critical for your business, you can reach out to your customer success manager, and he or she can walk you through that process. Again, the main takeaway here, and then I'll pass it over to Jen. We are realizing now more than ever how critical our employees are to our economic situation, and more importantly to our health and safety as well. And so now is the chance to really try to connect with them and approach this in the right way. And I will turn it over to Jen.
Thank you, Paul. It's so important to keep those employees at the forefront, especially right now. I'd like to go ahead and recap some of the key insights that we shared today, starting with Dave Ensing. Remember, don't focus on the absolute score. Right now, the time is to focus on looking at what things have changed and thinking about whether those changes are permanent or temporary. Dan Hickey emphasized looking for the opportunities and understanding how you can act quickly. The need is not going to be there forever. So how are you going to move quickly to address the needs? Jennifer shared how you shared that sharing what you know with leadership in a very clear way demonstrates the value of your program by providing deeper understanding and purposeful action that your organization can take from the data. And finally, Paul shared numerous examples of the different elements of stress that are impacting employees. Understanding the specific stress your employees are facing will better enable your organization to empower and engage employees during this time. I hope many of you will take us up on our offer to implement our employee pulse survey. So let's move on to the Q&A section. We've had a lot of questions come in, so I'd like to get started by sharing a few of these and sending them, having the experts weigh in. So I'm going to start, we have two questions actually that are related, so I'm going to read out both of those, and I'm going to ask Dan to start by answering these questions, and I'm hoping Paul might weigh in as well. So the first question is, we are a professional services firm, and leadership has requested that we pause our survey in light of the crisis and the challenges our clients are facing right now. Would you recommend doing that? And the second question, which is related, is we stopped sending our relationship-based surveys, but we continue to send our transactional-based surveys. Do you still recommend this? And if so, how long do we continue to not send the relationship surveys to customers? So Dan, if you could start, and then Paul, I'll ask you to add on to his answer.
Sure, thank you, Jen. So the first thing is we definitely recommend continuing to solicit feedback, and particularly with the transaction surveys as the one business was asking about. Now, in terms of relationship surveys, the issue is that typically in a relationship survey, you're looking to get at the big picture issues and desires of your clients. And so right now they're very focused on the immediate, so it can be hard to get a good read. So you really have to wait for us to be moving out of that. That being said, you may still want to, and particularly if this is a business-to-business relationship, you may want to do a short survey that focuses specifically on their immediate needs. So first is the business continuity. If you're a key supplier, they want to know that they can count on you to be able to continue to deliver, and you've probably been communicating that. So you want to ask them, has those messages landed? Do they understand your continuity plans and what you're doing to move forward? The second piece is they have some immediate priorities. And what are those immediate concerns, and how can you best address them? So you don't want to ask them to focus on the big picture future, and this is whether it's business or consumer. But you can ask more targeted questions. And as to when to bring in the relationship surveys again, it's really when things are getting close to back to normal. And with that, let me turn it over to Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. A lot of the same principles apply on the employee side. As I mentioned, now is the time to reach out and connect with employees because, again, there's going to be a large segment that feels disconnected. And we often say that feedback is a two-way conversation, or at least a conversation starter. So it's not just about collecting data. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to understand the themes, understand the fears, the problems that people see, and then, of course, close the loop on that. And so that's both on an individual level where you have representatives or personas within your organization that reach out to employees and resolve concerns, whether it's technology or other things, but also executive leadership acknowledging that people are concerned about A, B, and C. And we've got several clients that are doing virtual town halls. They're doing these Ask Me Anything, and they're using the questions from the survey for those. And it's just a way to say, listen, we are still having a conversation here, and we're still connecting as an organization.
Paul, hey, Jen, this is Dave.
Oh, yeah, please.
Jen, this is Dave. I'd also like to just very briefly add on to another point, which is if you're thinking about terminating your survey, one of the things that I'd look at is just look at your response rates, because if your response rates haven't taken a hit, it means that your customers still want to talk to you. So I would just look at that and think, are they still engaging with us? Are they still talking to us? And if they are, then there's probably not a reason to terminate or suspend your survey. So let that be part of your guide. That's all I wanted to say.
That's a great point, Dave. Thank you. We've got a lot of great questions here. Paul, since you mentioned speaking to employees, I wanted to share this question that came up from someone who indicated that last week they got shot down to do an employee experience survey, and now what? So is there any advice you have to help with any organizations that are facing obstacles like that?
Yeah, I think there is, a thought process out there that this is the time to kind of pause everything. And again, I think we need to disabuse some leaders from that idea. Again, this does not need to be a full-fledged census survey, time-based, where you go out to the whole population. Maybe choosing certain segments or a cross-section and running a quick pulse as to how people are feeling. Again, sometimes just asking the question can change the culture, right? Because it helps them to know that you're still trying to connect with them, be in contact with them, and especially those essential workers that are on the front line that may feel like they're out there on their own. Maybe that's the segment that you should focus on and kind of triage that and say, these are our essential employees during this time. And so kind of, taking away the idea that it has to be this huge program. Instead, let's just go out and ask a couple of questions, even if it's an open end and some general, how do you feel right now? Those kind of questions. Again, the process of listening, the process of starting conversations, I think, does more to, improve the culture than anything else.
That's great. Jennifer, we received a question that I think maybe you can help answer. And that is, prior to the pandemic, we didn't have much demand from leadership to use the VOC insights, even though we've had a VOC program in place for 5 years. Leadership, in quotes, already knows what customers want through other insights. So I'm not having much luck engaging them even now. Do you have any recommendations for an organization that's facing that obstacle?
Yeah. So in general, I'm sure that's very disheartening. But I think that I do agree that, you're still sitting on a gold mine. They just don't realize it yet. So my recommendation would be to create, a very tailored deliverable that focuses on changes that you're seeing right now because of the crisis, and rather than just giving them, kind of a summary of where things stand today, really kind of focusing on what's changed and what you feel they need to learn from this. I think that, moving away from presenting scores may help that as well, because I think in particular, what I've seen work really well with clients that are creating leadership deliverables today, it's very story focused on things that are different, focused on things that they need to keep an eye on, focused on things they know have changed. And I think if you create a deliverable that's focused in that way, see if that grabs their attention, because that's really what you need to do at this point, is just grab their attention and demonstrate value.
Thank you. The next question I'd like to ask, see if Dan, maybe you could share some insight on this. How do you balance the need to get insights from staff during this time? Particularly, this is an organization that is a hospital, and so the staff at the hospital is obviously consumed with other pressing needs. How do you not hassle them with an unnecessary task? Meaning, how do we get employee feedback during this time of crisis?
A great question. Thanks, Jen. So Paul actually alluded to one of the things to look at in his last answer, which is just we don't have to ask everyone every question. So break these up into groups, do samples, and rotate who's getting the questions when you're asking surveys. Second, if the feedback is coming through a survey, keep each survey relatively short. The rule of thumb for an online survey is that people can answer about 7 rating questions in a minute. So 14 questions is about a 2-minute survey. So use those kinds of things as your guideline. The other thing is balance that with some qualitative insight that lets you drill deep, but can do it in a way that's not so invasive. A technique that can be particularly good in this environment is online bulletin boards, because like focus groups, you're asking questions, but people don't make the specific commitment of this appointed hour. They just sign on at some point during the day, and they post, and there's a moderator asking additional questions, so it can fit into flexible schedules. The idea is to not need to be as precise and balance how many times you're reaching out to the same people and in what ways. But you can still do that without it being very invasive in terms of time.
Yeah, Dan, one thing I'll mention, this is Paul, I would also add that, as you look at the media and look at what's happening in the healthcare space, you see a lot of, those that are working with patients coming up with innovative ideas on how to deal with resource constraints and some of those things. And so I think just giving them an avenue whereby they can share those innovative ideas even, I think is important. Even if you don't get a lot of volume, the anecdotes and the suggestions can be very valuable, and it shows that you care about their opinion.
Good point. The next question that's come in that I'd like to ask to Jennifer. Jennifer, this question is, do you have any data or support around the concept of customers are watching how you're treating your employees, and that will determine if they will be a promoter of your brand going forward?
So it's a good question. I think it may be a little early. I think we can only look to kind of anecdotal evidence that we have so far. So just, if you're active on social media, people are talking about, talking about things that they're experiencing when they go into businesses or when they experience things. There's been recent strikes of Instacart, which I know that's impacted our household, just in thinking about how we're going to leverage that. So I think that it's honestly a little bit too early, but I think anecdotally we can say that we anticipate that what's happening right now, people are taking a close look and deciding who they want to work with in the future based on how organizations are supporting them as their customers and how they're treating their customers and the people that they're interacting with on, as they interact with the company. So I think to answer your question, it's probably too early for us to have data, but anecdotally, I think that we're anticipating this to see an impact on brand perceptions of companies that maybe haven't made the best decisions during this time.
Yeah, really quick.
Yeah.
There are a few retailers that where they've sent out memos, internal memos saying that they can't pay people, they have to be furloughed, and then you have GoFundMe pages that have been created by customers that are essentially saying we want to support these essential workers. Now, a lot of those brands have reversed course and corrected kind of the initial lack of empathy, but that it's kind of a phenomenon that's going on anecdotally, as Jennifer mentioned.
And I'll just add one additional point is that while there's not much data yet about response to this specific, we do see a lot of data that shows that consumers, particularly millennials, are very interested in the social position of the companies that they're doing business with. So I think that falls in under this larger heading. And so if we think about that trend, it's pretty likely that it's going to have an impact.
I agree, which brings a related question that was asked. And Dave, I'm going to put you on the spot because this came from the mobility sector to maybe give an answer to it first. But this question comes in, it relates to the sensitivity we have to how do we address these things. We're trying to move quickly, but we also want to be very sensitive to how we're using this information. So this question is, our open ends reveal positive comments about transaction handling in spite of COVID. So this includes off-site delivery, sanitation practices, etc. How wary should we be about promoting these comments to clients? It would be nice if clients could see that these transactions are safe based on peer testimonial, but want to balance that with tone appropriateness. How do we strike this tone in regards to promoting these comments?
Then that's a tough question. So I think you do have to be pretty concerned about that. You certainly don't be seen as cherry picking your data and just presenting the good things, and there might be bad things out there. So one of the things that we talk to clients about is talking to customers about how they're acting on their CX data. So we found this issue through the CX data. Here's how we're addressing it. I'm wondering if you can use something similar here where you can say, hey, our customers are telling us these good things that our units or our stores or whoever are doing, and from that, we're taking these things and we're making them national, or we're rolling out, or we're encouraging our other units to do it. Obviously, you have to actually be doing that to say that, but that might be one way to do it where it doesn't sound like you're cherry picking good experiences. So here's what we're hearing, here's the good stuff, and we're trying to do more of that.
Yes, definitely a need to handle it delicately. Well, we've had a lot of good questions come in, and I can see that we haven't addressed all of them, but we're reaching the top of the hour. For those of you who we did not reach out to with your questions, we will reach out to you individually and follow up with you to make sure that we're able to answer your questions. So that's all the time we have for today's webinar. I do want to thank everyone for joining us today, and I want to thank our panel of experts. Super job on taking on a tough subject. I do want to let you know that if you want more information about how to manage your experience programs in a time of crisis, we're offering a couple of timely pieces written by several of our experts. You can download these by simply clicking on the respective image on your screen, or by going to the resource library on MaritzCX.com. Or give us a call or email us at the number or email on the screen. We'll be happy to send you an electronic copy. With that, please have a great day and please stay safe. Thank you.